Airport employees of Reddit, what's the strangest, funniest, scariest thing that happened at your airport? I was at the airport one day, waiting for my girlfriend to come pick me after my flight. She was about 20 minutes away, so I sat down by a window ledge to Reddit, obviously. And like normal, there were various airport employees, security people, passengers, etc., wandering around. After about 5 minutes, I notice a couple cops with a dog eyeing me up. They go to walk by, and all of a sudden the dog gets really close to me and then sit down. The cops give me an intense look and reach under the ledge where I was sitting. All of a sudden, they pull out a bag with a few grams of substances in it. This is not my substances, and I start freaking out internally like any normal person. One of the cops goes, "What's this all about?" Then the other cop bursts out laughing and explains that they are doing training, and I happened to sit down right over the exact spot they had previously hidden the bag of substances for the dog to find. The cops were laughing so hard they had to take a couple-minute break from their training, and after my blood pressure kind of returned to normal, I thought it was pretty funny too. I should have mentioned I had at least 300 feet of window ledge to choose where to sit, and I happened to pick that exact spot. Story 2. Pittsburgh International, 3 a.m. or so several years ago. Watched an older woman tumble down the up escalator. Every time she flipped over, she yelled, "I'm okay," like Filbert from Rocko's Modern Life. Flop, I'm okay. Flop, I'm okay. Flop, I'm okay. Rolled in place for maybe a minute before someone shut the thing off. Story 3. Airports employ falconers. The birds are used to keep other birds away from aircraft because a bird in an engine can really mess up someone's day. So this falconer had come into the airport with his bird to grab a cup of coffee. He decided to try to impress some ladies by taking the hawk's hood off and doing a little demonstration. What he failed to notice was the starlings resting outside on a steel beam. Hawk flew after starlings, smoked the glass, and broke its neck. Thousands of dollars worth of highly trained bird gone. Story 4. My mom worked for British Airways for years, dealing with special freight cases for import, export. Much of this freight was offloaded and put in a holding warehouse for customers to collect. It wasn't your typical suitcases and luggage of traveling passengers. One shipment came in from Africa, a large wooden crate that didn't actually weigh very much. Her client came in, opened the crate to check the contents, and immediately became hugely irate to the warehouse staff. He barges into her office holding a frozen, venomous snake. She said it looked like a jagged lightning bolt, all zigs and zags. He's screaming at her in the office, gesturing wildly with this dead snake, demanding compensation in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Turns out he didn't declare them as animals, probably to get around any customs laws. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of various venomous snakes in the crate. The cargo area of most planes isn't heated, so the poor snakes had frozen, literally. He couldn't sue and had to answer some interesting questions from the Treasury Department once all was said and done. The sucky thing is he was importing them to make anti-venom. If he'd only declared them and paid for them to be shipped correctly, he would have made a health profit and probably saved some lives. Story 5. I was cabin crew doing a turnaround from Dubai, UAE, to Muscat, Oman, and back again. We're on ground in Muscat and hear from ground staff to take extra care of a passenger who is about to board. She was an English lady in her 50s, as you can imagine. Well turned out, but unassuming all the same. But she looked completely shaken when she boarded. So what happened was, she had checked in her luggage and had gone on to security. She placed her trolley bag on the conveyor belt, and she went through the metal detector and was waiting on the other side for her bag. Next thing she knows, she's being detained, placed in handcuffs, and taken to a room for questioning. They take in her bag and start questioning her. Airport police officer. Did you pack this bag yourself? A lady. Yes. Airport police. So, you know what's in the bag? Lady. Yes. And goes about describing what's in the bag. The questioning goes on for a while and is quite aggressive. The police officer then opens up the bag, and right on top of everything is this parcel filled with substances. She's aghast and protests her innocence, doesn't know anything about it. This poor lady is completely distraught. The gravity of it is hitting her, and she's inconsolable. Substances trafficking anywhere is a big no, but in Middle Eastern countries, it can end up giving you the penalty. The officers reviewed the footage of when her bag was scanned, and when she placed her bag on the belt and turned away, a man standing right behind her in seconds undid the zips and slipped it in. She had no idea who this man was. So she was let go and free to continue traveling, but her trolley bag was confiscated as evidence. She wasn't too worried about the bag at that stage. I got her a very big brandy. Lesson to be learned is to not let your bags out of your sight, even for a second. Story 6. I work at my local airport. I live on a tiny island, and this airport is smaller than our library. And just last summer, we had a hurricane looming down on us. Everyone is getting packed up to evacuate. We're renting cars like crazy to people fleeing, and we're trying to get them out of the storm area. I was out checking on the cars we had, and when I walked back up, there was a man sitting on a bench out front, with an apocalyptic-looking storm bearing down on us, wind whipping everywhere, just soulfully playing the trombone. No idea where he came from or what he was doing, but it was surreal, like something out of a David Lynch film. Story 7. I worked at a corporate aircraft maintenance place, and we had a situation where this crazy woman somehow got out on the secured ramp area. By the time one of our line service guys saw her, she had the main entry door opened up on a Global Exers aircraft. When he pulled up, she looked at him and asked if he could help her get her bags on board. When he told her he couldn't, she told him she was going to fly the plane to China and didn't want to be late. After that occurrence, the security at our airport became insane. Story 8. Worked at Perth Airport until recently. Most flights in Perth go to Bali, and you see some right characters. A Jetstar flight was delayed by 7 hours, and a woman and her husband used the time to get absolutely crap-faced. The woman fancied a cigarette, and rather than go outside and go through security again, lit up in the middle of the duty-free. My colleagues quickly tried to stop her, but she told them to duck off. Cue airport police. $10,000 fine and no flight to Bali. Should have listened to the staff. Story 9. My time to shine. Most of the airport work is mundane, but you will get the odd passenger that leaves an impression on you. There was a group of people coming through for a business trip and their boss had never flown before. One of his employees came in and explained they told him he needed dental records for TSA and wanted us to play along. So the boss comes in and hands me his ID and an x-ray from his dentist to check in for his flight. Trying not to laugh, I show it to my coworker who points at it and says, "Well, SA might have an issue with that." Dude's face went white as a sheet until his employees busted up laughing. He got super red in the face and eventually started laughing at himself. Never let it be said that airports are humorless places. Story 10. I used to do cargo for Delta and British Airways. We ship a lot of dead people, a lot of animals too. They actually sent me to LA to go to a class entirely on animal handling. There's regulations and procedures for everything all the way up to elephants and whales and crap. Weirdest thing we ever got to actually ship was an alligator of some sort. Story 11. Not me, but my father was regional manager of one of the rental car companies at the airport. And on the 11th of September, when all flights were grounded, everyone needed rental cars. And it was havoc. My father said the phone rang and he almost didn't answer because he was so busy. Turns out it was the company's CEO and ordered him to hand out keys free. No cost, no documentation as the situation was severe, and all other major rental companies followed suit. Not necessarily strange, funny, or scary, but it is one of the few stories he told me about the job as a kid that I always remember. Story 12? Wasn't funny in any way, but this guy had to bring the ugliest dog I have ever seen to the airport and send it to his ex-wife so that she could put it down. She hated him and the dog, but she had a better lawyer. Guy was a big burly dude fighting back tears the whole time and asked if he could take him out to play with him in the grass one more time. Story 13. Probably the lightning striking the ground next to an airplane we were loading, or the engine fire I had when pushing a plane off the gate. Was able to take some pictures, so that was cool. Story 14. Last year, I was working as a contractor in the planning department of a large commercial airport. This airport has a park between the runways that people go to sit and watch planes. I decide to take my 2 young boys out there one evening because they like to watch the planes take off and land. It starts to get dark, and I see a lady stand up and put her arms up and start making a howling sound. At first, I didn't know what she was doing or where the sound was coming from. I hear it again and realize it's her, and she might be a little crazy. This continues for a few minutes, and I decide to leave. Meanwhile, she's still standing there, arms up, howling at the planes taking off. A week or so later, I had to ride around the airport with an operations guy, and I tell him about my trip to the park and what happened. He says, "Was there a Lufthansa Airbus leaving while she was doing that?" I tell him, yeah, there was. He proceeds to tell me that she's pretty well known around there. According to him, she believes that she died on a Lufthansa flight in a previous life and has been reincarnated into her current body. She thinks her soul is still connected to the flight somehow. She goes there to pray over the same Lufthansa flight every time it departs. Story 15. Not me, but a guy I once met. He works at the counter for a big local airline. There was a lady about mid to late 50 about to board with 4 big suitcases. This was a time when you normally could bring up to 2 suitcases or 23 kilograms. He notices this and tells the lady she would have to pay for the extra 2 suitcases. The lady nonchalantly says, "Oh, my husband is carrying those." He asks about her husband and again, completely relaxed, and in a natural voice, she points at the plane and answers, "That's him in the coffin." After that, he apologizes and let the lady board. Edit. A little bit of clarification. Story 16. I used to periodically work security to supplement my income. In 2002, I'm assigned for the first time to Spirit Airlines repair facility at Meekum International Airport in Fort Worth, TX. One day, I'm sitting in the guard shack with a coworker reading a book when a number of Fort Worth Police Department vehicles swarm the parking lot. SWAT officers, accompanied by an impressive number of federal officers, lock the place down at gunpoint. My coworker and I get dragged out of the guard shack. And yes, I do mean dragged, and held by law enforcement at gunpoint while they secured the facility. It turns out that Spirit hadn't been doing proper background checks on the mechanics, and a number of them were in the country illegally, using falsified documents. Many were suspected of having ties to extremist groups on the Philippines. The scuttlebutt around the office is that a C-level executive for Spirit had flown them in privately to cut payroll costs, but this was never confirmed. As if that wasn't bad enough, my coworker and I were reprimanded for not calling our supervisory staff as soon as the raid occurred. Story 17. My parents worked in airports and told me this story that happened sometime in the late 70s. They notice a patch of purple on the marble floor near the check-in queue. Thinking someone has spilt their red wine on the floor, a cleaner comes over and clears it up. About half an hour later, there's another pool of purple. A different cleaner comes along, clears it up. Eventually, the original cleaner comes back, notices the same pool he cleared up already is back. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks up. There's an air vent, dripping something. Maybe it's air conditioning coolant or something. He reports it to his supervisor. Nothing happens for a day or two. They just keep mopping up this coolant. Eventually, they send an air contact into the roof. He comes back down the ladder, white as a sheet. It's a body. Turns out someone had tried to break past security by climbing through the air ducts. This is pre-Die Hard, remember? So quite clever. What wasn't so clever was taking a wrong turn in the dark and falling 30 feet into a fan mechanism drop. Smoosh. Story 18. Not me, but a friend. He used to work refueling planes. Most days during lunch, he would sit in the airport and do some people watching. Anyway, a cart with a bunch of baggage rolls by and the bag on the end falls off without anyone noticing, but him. After some time, security is notified of the unknown bag. Taking all precautions, security bring in the bomb-sniffing dog to check it out. The dog sniffs it for a second, and then all of a sudden begins to dry. Hump the bag. This was all before the 11th of September. Story 19. Another one, this time from my dad. We're coming off a plane at Lagos Airport. It's 1992. I'm about 10 years old. So I wander around the baggage hall and find, in a secluded corner, a service lift with a bloody great hole cut out of the door. It's cordoned off so you can't use it. I ask my dad about it. A cleaner had been using the service lift one night after a shift to go back up to the departure area, where he could stash his trolley, etc. Lift breaks down between floors. The emergency help button does nothing. This is Nigeria, remember? And of course, it's way before mobile phones were even introduced. He pounds and pounds on the interior of the lift, but it's in a quiet bit of the airport where no one goes. He's not scheduled to be on shift the next day. His colleagues come in and assume the trolley has been stolen as the cupboard is open, and it's not there. They carry on. When they try to use the service lift, it doesn't work. They don't hear their colleague as he's trapped closer to the floor below than the one above. Trapped cleaner has now been in there 18 hours or so. He's desperate. He drinks the water from the mop bucket, still pounding on the lift, hoping someone will come. 24 hours pass. His family come to the airport to find out where he is. Their village has no telephone, at least not one that works. Colleagues haven't seen him. Maybe he's gone into the city to spend his paycheck given to him that morning. Eventually, it's been nearly 48 hours. Trapped man is feeling sick from drinking mop bucket water. He's had to use another bucket as a toilet. The smell is unbearable. A technician arrives to try to fix the broken lift. He's saved, or not. The tech manages to get the lift back down to the ground floor, but the doors won't open. They try prying, jimmying. Nothing's budging them. They even removed the motors and tried by hand. Eventually, they realize they'll have to cut him out. So they fire up the angle grinder and cut a 2-foot by 2-foot hole in the door. Sparks flying everywhere. That's just the outer skin. They can't get the angle grinder in further to the inner door. Welding torch comes out. Gas axe or whatever you want to call it. Of course, this is flinging hot metal into the lift. The cleaner is absolutely scared crapless. He's been in the dark for 48 hours and now someone is flinging hot metal at him. Eventually, they make a hole all the way through. He crawls out, collapses, and is taken away in an ambulance. He survived, but does not return to his job at the airport. The broken lift was still there until we left in 1995. When I returned on business in 2001, it had been repaired. I still think about the poor guy whenever I get in a lift. Story 20. Not an employee, but a passenger. I got flagged for a random TSA pat-down, and the agent asked me if I had any metal in my body, to which I said, I have an IUD. The agent freaks out and starts flagging other agents over. She musters all her calm and says, please repeat that you have an IED on you. To which I had to say, no, an IUD, a copper intrauterine device for birth control. She didn't know what an IUD was. I bet she'll remember now. Story 21. I used to work in the only bar in a tiny airport in the north of England. International flights and everything, but instead of having trained falcons or hawks or whatever, we had a guy in his 60s called Tom who used to sit in a foldable chair on the airfield and shoot down birds. He used to come in for a pint after the last flight of the day. Story 22. A little different, but I work avionics in the Air Force. Most of the work is done outside. One day on mid-shift, we get told to go inside, turn off the lights, and not look outside. Not knowing what was going on, we obviously complied. Once everyone was inside, the big stadium lights that covered the entire airfield were turned off and all the entire airfield was dark. We heard low rumbling in the distance that was getting closer and rumors started flying. We were under attack. Aliens, you name it. Eventually, we could hear 3 large planes fly very low overhead and be gone. After 15 more minutes, we were given the go-ahead to go back outside and back to work. To this day, I still don't know what happened. Story 23. Not an employee. Dad ran a business in Missouri and hired a mechanic who ended up being horrible. Left his tools everywhere, trucks he worked on would break down, everything was covered in oily fingerprints, etc. Employee was fired and forgotten. Fast forward a few years, my parents are on their honeymoon in Cancun getting on the plane to come back home, when the pilot announces over the PA system that the plane can't take off for a while because of maintenance. My dad looks out the window at the wing and sees oily fingerprints and tools all over the wing and the ground. His old mechanic walks out from under the wing and begins working under a panel on the wing. Dad gets super worried and wants off the plane immediately. No, he didn't get off. Since they'd paid for the flight, I don't think Mom was going to let them leave in a million years. They made it safely home, or I wouldn't be here to tell you all the story. Story 24. Not me, but my sister works at the airport. Funny things. Sex convention in town. Someone going through security had a sex toy that has a suction cup to one side to stick on a table or other surface. TSA employee didn't realize what it was when doing a bag check and stuck the suction part on the table. They had to slide it to the edge of the table to release the suction. Scary, I guess. Dude coming through security. His bag goes off as needing to be checked because there is something coming up like a weird metal inside of plastic. They pull out a pencil case and open it. When the agent opens it, the scorpion inside's tail shoots up. The guy won it at a scorpion fight or something. TSA employee was like, damn this. I'm going home, funny and scary, my personal favorite. In the security area for checked bags. Employee A asks his supervisor of the next day off to start his week or so off early. Supervisor says no because he already has a lot of time off. A is checking a bag when something pokes his hand. He tells his supervisor that there is something sharp in the bag that stabbed him. Sup thinks he's trying to make excuses to go home, but checks the bag. The sharp thing was a scorpion. Sup tells it to sit down with his hand down and calls first aid. They put the bag inside of plastic bags because they are all afraid of this scorpion. Agriculture comes after handling a situation at a different airport and puts the scorpion on ice to kill it and asks the hospital if they need it for anti-venom. Dude calls his supervisor and tells him he won't be in tomorrow or for the next month because they had to give him so much anti-venom. Then tells his boss to call him the Scorpion King. It looked big. Also, I believe this all, except the sex convention one, happened in the international terminal, but I could be wrong about that. Story 25. A grown woman fell asleep while waiting for her flight to board. They called her name several times. This was a small airport, so it was quiet and she was in the area. She just slept through it. She woke up and realized it after the gate agent had already pulled back the ramp and the plane was backing up to begin its taxi. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, cursing, crying, and then go on her phone with her mommy and kept screaming that her mom had to do something for her because the a-hole ticketing agent wouldn't let her on the flight. And again, this is a grown woman. She ended up running into the airport bathroom in full hysterics and had to be dragged out by half a dozen TSA employees. Not as weird, but still funny to me. A guy came to tell me that someone had left their luggage in the boarding area. There's constantly an announcement about telling someone if they see abandoned luggage or something suspicious. I tell him, okay, I'll call TSA. He's clearly freaking out and going on about how there's probably a bomb in the bag. I calm him down and he goes back to his seat. About 10 minutes later, I go over to him with the TSA agent and ask him where's the bag. He points to a bag right next to him and starts rambling again about how there's probably a bomb in it, etc. So I just ask him, if you're so sure there's a bomb in the bag, why are you sitting right next to it? You could just see the light bulb go on in his head. Story 26. I used to work on the ramp for ups and we had a couple incidents in my time. One of our small aircraft was on approach and had an issue with his hydraulics. The pilot turned off his automatic systems to fix the issue manually. With no warning to tell him otherwise, he landed the plane without landing gear. Told this story before, but we used to ship crates of bees in our system. A box broke loose mid-flight in a Beech 99. The pilot had to declare a state of emergency, take the plane as high as it could go to subdue the bees, and then land as quickly as he possibly could. We had an employee mangle his hand trying to attach a tow bar to the front wheel, and that crap was never the same. But the scariest might not be what happens at an airport, but who works at the airport ramp at 2 a.m. During my 3.5 years there, I worked with 3 separate attempted murderers. One guy got into an argument at a local college and beat someone in a classroom. Another beat his girlfriend's daughter, and she passed away. He's currently on Arizona death row. And most heart-wrenching for me, one of my friends, a dude who I was super cool with and I thought of as super nice, was involved in a robbery that went south. His partner ended up beat with the knife the woman they were trying to get money from. Then the two of them went on the run and his partner beat him and he passed away before he take his life away. It was a dark time. Story 27. I was not an airport employee, but was shadowing employees as part of a pilot training program. One of our rotations was to spend a few days with the fire department. Not much action, fortunately, but the fire station was in the middle of the airfield, so the view was epic. The Virginia Air National Guard operated F-16 from the airport at the time. They would go out 3 jets at a time and would land 1, 2, 3 in quick succession. I was in the fire station when 3 F-16s were on short final to land. The tower asked a biz jet to hold short of their arrival runway. The biz jet either didn't hear or misunderstood and rolled out onto the runway. The tower told the F-16s to go around. The lead jet banked a hard left, followed by the number 2 jet, but number 3 kept coming, gear down, landing light on. The tower called to the number 3 jet to go around. ANG radios are encrypted, so we could only hear the tower talking, not the F-16. The number 3 jet was still coming. The biz jet had nowhere to go, and the firefighters started getting antsy. The number 3 F-16 flew directly over the top of the biz jet, simultaneously pulled up his gear and hit the afterburner, barreled half the length of the runway, then pulled up hard left to join his buddies. The F-16 probably cleared the biz jet by 100 feet, but it seemed a lot closer to us in the fire station, and I'm sure even closer to the biz jet pilot. The firefighters found it hilarious. Story 28. Worked at a tiny little airport with puddle hopper planes. Plane landed on a really damn windy day in the winter, so there was still some ice on the ground. I went out to flag the plane in and watched incredulously as the wind blew the entire plane sideways toward the ditch next to the taxiway. The pilot had to do some serious engine revving to keep the plane from going into the ditch. Kind of funny and a little scary. Luckily, no one was passengers were on board. Story 29. I work the cargo ramp. We're at the very edge of the main runway, and there's a marshy area about 200 feet from the end of the runway. One day, we saw a pickup roll out on the service road near the marsh, and hear several shotgun blasts. A couple minutes later, the airport guys in the truck roll up and ask if anyone wants some free geese. One of our crew took 2 geese home and smoked them for us. Delicious. Apparently, the geese were just coming right back to that spot if they were forcibly relocated, so they had to be permanently removed. Story 30. A school friend's father worked on passport control at Gatwick in the mid-'80s. In those days, passports were often handwritten and had spaces for things like distinguishing features. One day, a young woman presented her passport to him, and he opened it and compared the photo, and then paused before saying, "This is a bit unusual." He showed her the open passport, which read in part, "Distinguishing features. Big tits." She exclaimed, "My brother. I'll kill him." Story 31. Not scary, but I worked at a little bookstore in Orlando International about a decade ago. We sold only books and book-related items. Placekeepers, reading glasses, book lights, etc. Because there was an actual newsstand a little ways across the terminal that we didn't bother competing with. One day, a very tall, angular, and frankly intimidating bald man came rushing up to the counter and straight up yelled into my bewildered face, "Where are your newspapers?" I stuttered out my canned apology and pointed across the way to the other shop. He growled and hauled ass in that direction without a word. Another customer who'd heard the shout approached me exclaiming, "Don't you know who that was?" I did not. It was a fellow called James Carville, a well-known political commentator and media personality. I once had a coffee with a fully costumed and very convincing Abraham Lincoln at the Starbucks next to our shop. I also had a pleasant, if somewhat morbid in light of her profession, run-in with Dr. G, John Garavaglia. The worst near miss, though. My best friend worked in the same store and was working a shift while I had my day off. I came back the next day to an amazing gift from her. James Earl Jones had graced our little shop and signed a few of the Star Wars pop-up books we had in stock. My best friend hadn't recognized him at all and wasn't even familiar with his career until our manager approached him. She was shocked that he'd voiced Vader and gushed to me about getting to meet Simba's dad. Sigh. Story 32. Obligatory, not an airport employee. This happened in Manila, which had the notorious distinction of having the worst airport in the world for several years in a row. While we were waiting for our baggage, the conveyor belt stalled. Instead of calling a technician to fix the belt, the idiots running the belt tried to jump start it and instead sent a section of the rubber parts of the conveyor flying. Luckily, no one was hurt. It did cause a big scene, though, and took about an hour for the conveyor to start working again. Now you're asking, couldn't they just reassign you to another baggage claim? Nope. Remember, this is the Manila airport we're talking about. We don't go the extra mile for our travelers. No, sir. But that wasn't the best part of the whole experience. After waiting for what seemed like an eternity, people were already getting their bags and whatnot. A particular box comes out of the magic butthole of the conveyor, and an excited passenger reaches for it. Happy as he is that the box, clearly labeled fragile, survived intact, he goes and grabs it from the conveyor. Said contents of the box, which look like fine china, promptly come crashing onto the conveyor and surrounding floor, which causes another delay in the baggage while the airport employees clean up the mess. The man, clearly exasperated, just can't help but laugh at how crappy his day was going. Good for him. I remember another incident. While checking into our flight, a certain airport employee was offering people to skip the lines in exchange for some money. Some Korean lady actually took him on that offer. I would have tried to warn her, but she just bolted right with the guy. Story 33. My father worked as ground crew at a large airport in the 90s. Sometimes he would have to take my brother and I to work with him, and on a very rare occasion, we were in one of the vehicles out on the tarmac. It was an older station wagon. Dad had left to do some work on the tarmac and explicitly told my brother and I not to touch anything in the car. So of course, my brother, being the antsy pants he was, at some point decides he wants to roll down the back window in the station wagon. He climbs into the driver's seat and starts pulling levers. If I remember correctly, the gear shifter on this vehicle was on the steering column, and of course this is what he grabs. The car starts to roll towards a fairly large airplane. I don't remember exactly what happened next, but as my dad remembers it, much of the ground crew began chasing after the car as it rolls closer and closer to this large airplane. Finally, one of the crew manages to jump into the car and stop it, just a few feet short of the plane. Not too sure of the distance, but it was pretty close. At the time, it was pretty scary, but looking back on it now, we all find it pretty hilarious. My dad tells us some stories on occasion as well. Another favorite of mine is how when he was working arrivals on the tarmac, if he saw people standing before the plane stopped moving, he'd very sharply give the stop signal to the pilot so they'd push on the brakes a little harder. Story 34. Not an airport employee, but my dad is. I'm sure he's got many stories, but my favorite is one I also experienced. We're in the T-Say line as a family, on our way to visit family across the country. The line is, it's regular slow self, but we're nearing the point where we have to take off our shoes and belts and whatnot. Suddenly, there's a commotion in front of us where people pick us their bags after scanning. A woman has packed the following things into her carry-on and is refusing to hear TSA when they tell her she can't take them on. A full-size Costco double pack of peanut butter, a toaster, the kind that flings your toast in the air, a blender with blade. I'm sure there were other things too, but I've never forgotten those 3 things being slowly pulled out of her bag. Story 35. 4 years ago, I got an airport job as a ramp agent at a charter airport in my town. I worked every summer there, but this story still comes back to me. Most of our passengers are from Russia, and you know what Russia is famous for? Russians. So I get a call that a passenger ready to board a flight is drunk out of his mind. Usually, the cabin crew and the pilots decide whether or not to let him travel. The passenger bus arrives at the aircraft, and from the seat next to the driver comes out a tall, fat drunk. The bus driver helps him stay on his feet. He miraculously climbs the steps, but then the cabin crew rejects him. He was already in his seat and doesn't want to disembark. Border police gets involved. 2 well-built guys try to drag him out of his seat, but he manages to pull them back in and spews profanities. As I see there isn't an improvement, I get down to the cargo compartments to search for his checked-in bag. A bag can't travel normally without a passenger, and this aircraft was with containers. Ayo, we need to search through 8 containers with 30 bags each. As we are looking through them, the cleaning staff comes on. I ask my colleagues why would they come now, and he tells me that the man shat himself. He was in the front rows. When I got back on board, all the passengers were covering their noses and mouths. Story 36. Incident was when we were loading a plane. I was in the plane with my lead sending up bags. He puts one to the side and calls a supervisor because it is vibrating. Supervisor comes out, a cool Hispanic guy, relevant, to check it out. From my view in the pit, I watch him open it, and suddenly he starts smiling and shouting in an accent, which made it even funnier. "Oh no, oh no!" Sure enough, it was a personal massager, and from what I was told, the supervisor had to pull the passenger off the plane onto the jet bridge to disarm the device, who was apparently an 18-year-old blonde woman who turned completely red-faced. Little tip, when you travel, to take the batteries out. A weird one I had back downstairs working in the sorter. I had one bag drop onto my pier, a regular piece of luggage, but it opens up on me. It does happen rarely. I go to close it, and what confused me was that it contained only 4 white t-shirts, but was filled to the top with packages of soft shell tortillas going to Texas. Just a weird thing to take to a state where they probably have a lot of options for that. One that kind of pissed me off was a bag that had come from China and flying with us, but someone thought it was a good idea to strap 2 unsheathed metal swords to the back of it. They weren't even good quality as they were already bent, not even sharp, the kind they sell to tourists in novelty stores. But that someone thought this was smart, and that an agent accepted this in China just baffled me. Story 37. I just started working for a regional carrier when I was tasked to clean the lavatories. I was driving my little buggy around when I got jet blasted by a Card 900 trying to pull into its gate. About 10,000 napkins went flying into the runways, causing planes to divert left and right. Somehow, I didn't lose my job. Story 38. 16 crew chief, so I sort of worked at an airport. I was only a guardsman, so I didn't see too many crazy things. But one of the jets dumped about 40 gallons of JP-8 jet fuel out of its right wing onto the ground and my friend while he was doing a pre-flight inspection. I don't know why, but my first instinct was, that crap is going to ignite because the jet was on. It didn't, so it was just funny seeing my friend's pants soaked with jet fuel. Story 39. Now, I don't work at an airport, but I do clear commercial imports into Canada and deal with border officers quite often. I had just logged into my computer to start working when my at-the-time supervisor came over to my desk, slammed some paperwork onto my desk and told me, "You really messed up this time." Apparently, my company wanted to be more environmentally friendly and decided to start printing invoices on both sides of a piece of paper. So basically, with this particular shipment, I had declared 3 out of the 6 invoices to CBSA. For anyone who is not familiar with customs, that is a big no-no. So we get notification that the shipment has been flagged for investigation. And I was told that if anything bad happens with this shipment, it's on me. Which, when translated, is essentially, you ducked up, say goodbye to your job. My supervisor gave me an out. Call the superintendent at the port and kiss some serious booty. She gives me the number, and I get connected with the superintendent's receptionist. I briefly inform her of my intentions to speak with the superintendent, to which I am placed on a brief hold while she goes to find him. This brief hold turned into a 3-hour, non-exaggerated time. It was from 12 o'clock to 17 o'clock before this all got resolved. During these 3 hours, I sat patiently waiting for someone to talk back. All the while, I had my supervisor coming to check up on me to see where I was at with my situation. So 3 hours pass, and I get a call from CBSA. The caller ID showed up as GovTCan on my phone, and I was extremely nervous to pick up, but I was greeted with, "Good afternoon, this is the superintendent of the airport," to which my jaw dropped, and as I went to introduce myself to the superintendent, a thought crossed my mind. "You've been on hold for 3 hours waiting for this man. Maybe this will be my trump card." I immediately take on a soft, "Oh my dear Lord, I am terribly sorry" tone and explain to him that I was placed on hold for 3 hours. Not that it bothered me any, and that I didn't want to run the risk of having to call back and being a further nuisance to this nice man. To which I hear the man yell, "You've been what? On hold for 3 hours, give me a second." Radio chatter. Something about, "I told you to tell him that I was in a meeting for the rest of the afternoon and that I would call him back." The man comes back to the phone with a much more cooperative tone after that. He then asked me what I was calling for, to which I gave a sob story about how my company was just trying to help save the environment. I'm a git and that I wanted to avoid an AMPS, Administrative Monetary Penalty System penalty. He chuckled and said, "Is that all? Consider it done," and he let me correct my error. In the end, I avoided a fine that ranges from $200 upwards to $8,000, kept my job, and was able to create a reputation of being a smooth talker in my office. Story 40. I just got into work, and I was having breakfast with my coworkers. Outside the hangar, we heard some shouting going on, not normal for a Sunday. We all decided to walk to the ramp and check it out. On the other side of the chain link fence, the UPS parking lot, 3 very overweight airport cops are chasing a slightly overweight guy around all the cars on foot. Straight up Benny Hill style chase going on. A fire truck from the airport was shadowing this from the ramp. This chase had been going on for a long time at this point. Everyone was barely running. The parking lot has a fence on 3 sides, one side open. One of the 3 cops stopped his chase and went back to block the exit. The suspect realized he was trapped and just straight up charged the exit. The cop yelled, "Stop now or I'm going to taser you." The suspect in a full sprit screamed, "Tase me!" The guy got about 5 feet away from the cop and he shot him with the taser. It didn't stop this guy at all. He just kept on running. He literally passed the cop about 3 feet to his left and ran out of our sight. The cop looked at his taser and started swearing at it. The other 2 joined up with him and completely winded just stopped and looked at each other. Then the 3 of them walked out of our sight as well. The fire truck took off like hell to the other side of the ramp. Co-workers and myself decide to go through the hangar to the front office so we can get a better look at where the guy went. Out front, there's 3 cop cars parked on the road. 1 cop in 1 car, and the other 2 empty. The 3 cops from before are walking down from the parking lot. No suspect was with them. Then across the street, a few people ran out of the UPS office and were screaming and waving at the cops. The suspect was in their close parking lot trying to get into one of the cars. The fire truck is back in the UPS, FedEx ramp. The 4 cops now chase in after him. 1 in car, and 3 still on foot. The guy tries to run again, but he was trapped good. He turned and runs up the airport fence and jumps into the secured area. This was a 10-foot fence with barbed wire. He made it look easy. The cops didn't even try to jump the fence. The suspect running along the UPS building finally met his match. A fire truck. Not any fire truck, but a first response airport fire with a water cannon. The truck chased him down and blasted him with the water cannon. It picked him out and threw him into the building. This guy Rag dolled along the building from the water. It was awesome. I forgot to mention it was February and about 10 feet outside. It was really cold. The guy got back up and they blasted him again. He got up again but didn't run. He just turned and started limping away. He turned a corner and we lost sight again. The truck very slowly went around the corner as well. From what I learned later, the guy was picked up shorty after this. He willingly walked to the security guys at Oops and gave up. The suspect and an accomplice were breaking into cars at the fuel farm at the airport. They robbed two earlier in the week. That Sunday, they were caught in the act. The accomplice getaway driver left the other guy behind and rolled his car over on the other side of town in a high-speed chase. The fuel farm was about a half-mile away. The cops chased this guy on foot a half-mile before we even started watching. Story 41. Worked for a summer as a skycap at an airport in Maine. A couple of the 11th of September hijackers came through that airport, and then to Logan in Boston, which is where the hijacking took place. They chose this airport in Portland precisely because it was kind of podunk and no one would pay attention as much. A guy I worked with actually showed them to where the rental car place was because the way the airport was set up back then, it was in this weird corner, and people would ask for our help to find it constantly. Poor guy felt like he was in some way responsible. Story 42. I was in the San Juan PR airport in the American Airlines terminal on the morning of the 10th anniversary of the 11th of September. At 8 a.m., everything came to a halt, and there was a call for a minute of silence. All American Airlines employees just stopped, hung their heads, and slowly everyone else stopped talking. It was pretty much quite other than traffic and some industrial hum. It went from controlled chaos to stillness and back. Story 43. One time, a couple of us were wing-walking a 757 back from the gate, while our ACMX guy drove the pushback. After the jet is backed up, we're supposed to detach the pushback vehicle from the tow bar, then detach the tow bar from the plane's landing gear, and reattach the tow bar to the pushback vehicle. That day, the 757 parking brake failed, and, as we detached from the pushback, the plane started rolling toward us with the engines running. Looking up at a 100,000 pounds vehicle that's already basically on top of me while the engines came toward me was quite the experience. The captain had to stand on his pedal brake to stop the plane rolling so we could finish and get clear. Both the other people with me immediately went out for a smoke. Story 44. On the way back through TSA from a class trip to Germany, one of my classmates got pulled aside from the group because he bought gummy bears in bulk from a Haribo store and they thought he was smuggling something in them. Dude just really liked gummies. Story 45. I used to be a ramp manager for an air freight company in upstate Nye. We had a very small place at the airport with a plane that would park directly behind our building. It wasn't a huge plane, but we had enough business to warrant a bird for our market. We had a very vulgar GM at this facility. I always got along with him and never had issues with him, but there were times where he played the role of the screaming manager you often see in movie flicks. He always presented himself well, clean-shaved, sharp suits, shiny shoes, and perfectly placed hair. He also had a way with words. Some of the folks said he could sell ketchup popsicles to folks in white gloves. The facility we had was rather small, and the printer for the plane manifest was right next to our customer service window. When our manager heard the printer go off, he would briskly walk from his office to the printer and check out the status of the plane along with the inbound cargo. It was like clockwork every day, of our oxidate line printer spitting out the manifest then without hesitation, the click-clack of our GM's footsteps as he walked to the front of the office, where he would tear off the manifest, quickly glance, start pacing around the office, and scream at it. It was magical. Every day someone at the hub was trying to screw him, and he let us all know of it. He would start with the receptionist, show her the manifest then, strut over to the customs brokerage desk and scream to them. Sometimes he would rage out onto the dock and yell at the truck drivers while pointing at the green and white paper. Other times, if no one was at their desks, he would march out onto the ramp holding the paper pointing and screaming at it. Anyone who made eye contact was doomed to hear about it. This one morning, the routine goes down. He's standing at the printer, oblivious to his surroundings, and he goes off. Horses, damn horses, all of our freight was bumped because of the horses being flown in today's. What backwoods redneck needs horses air freighted in? They're trying to duck me again. During his rampage and pacing around, he did not notice the two attractive females that were waiting at the customer service desk. I had noticed them, and I gestured at the manager to hush, then pointed at the counter. He quickly spun around and turned red in the face. He began to apologize for his foul mouth instantly and went from pissed to impressive in a 180-degree fashion. His face was blush red, but with impeccable brilliance. He began to say very nice things while working some charm. He went on about how stressful things can be and how their faces have lifted his bad thoughts with. It was some remarkable swagger. They said it was no problem and smiled with charm at him. He then said, "How can I help you today?" while leaning with alpha dominance towards the prettier girl. The girl he was leaning towards says, "We're here to pick up the damn horses and we're definitely not trying to duck you," while making complete eye contact with him. His face then went 3 shades purple and he started to bite his bottom lip. He muttered, "Okay," put his head down, walked back to his office and shut the door. That day was wonderful. Our manager locked himself in his office until the plane came and the horses went with their owners. The next morning, he was back at it again, just like clockwork. Story 46. I work at an airport in baggage handling and doing this from a throwaway. I've seen some crazy bird strikes at airports, but one sticks out that was pretty bad. It was a 737 on final and flies through a flock of geese, and they get sucked into the engines. One engine basically explodes while the other continues to operate, but at reduced power. It managed to land, and upon inspection, the good engine should have failed as well. All the blades were chipped, some broken in half, and a couple were missing. It was a miracle that plane landed. If it had been taking off, it's very possible there would have been a loss of life because there was no Hudson River nearby. Just a lot of hard ground and trees. I talked to some of the ops guys, and they hate geese and deer because of strikes they've seen. Story 47? Worked at an airline over the summer as an intern. I was assisting in the check-in area and helping passengers who use the kiosks to check in. Now, this was the time many airlines introduced basic economy, and many people didn't know about the new baggage rules, which won't let you bring on a carry-on bag, just one personal item. This family of 5 comes along returning home, and they seem to know about the rule. Maybe they encountered it on the way here. But they all had backpacks, a couple of them, more than one actually. So I go and kindly remind them about the basic economy baggage rules, and they snapped back at me and said they knew. So they had about 9 bags, all relatively small bags. So in order to save money on their checked bags, the father takes out a big roll of tape and just sits down in the check-in area taping their bags together, so it'll only be one. Everyone looked at them, but it worked. Story 48. Worked at the airport in Melbourne, Florida. A family arrived from Spain for vacation. Apparently their travel agent screwed up the flight reservations. They were supposed to go to Melbourne, Australia. I later heard they made the most of it and ended up going to Disney, I think. Story 49. I work at the maintenance center for a major domestic airline at San Francisco. One day a stranger showed up inside our shop asking who to see about applying for a job there. After a few questions, we found out he was not an employee and had jumped a barbed wire fence and was wandering around airport property without a badge. We called security, and they escorted him off the property. This was post the 11th of September also. Story 50. Former flight attendant here. When flights would get gate changes, anyone in uniform near the prior gate would get flocked by passengers. One time, in trying to avoid being surrounded, I started talk walk, run away from the gate at a very brisk pace. I lost my balance and went sliding across the terminal floor. My Starbucks spilled, both of my shoes came off, but I was told the whole thing was quite graceful. During the flight, I still had to serve these passengers who watched me fall. I got little comments here and there about how someone would catch me or don't trip. Story 51. So I didn't work for an airport. I worked for a tourism company that rented out an office in the airport. The job was first flight in to last flight out, so like 18-hour shifts a few days a week. Absolutely sucked. The upside was you gotta know basically everyone in the airport. The help desk ladies, the cabbies out front, the late-night escorts that troll for lonely businessmen, etc. 2 of the characters I met were police officers. Let's call them Brain and Jeff. See, the airport has a ton of security, but only really 2 police officers. Jeff, the younger, probably only 4 or 5 years older than I was, patrolled the inside of the airport. He was always super chipper and happy to be a cop. Brain, just about to retire. The story was he had a major drinking problem, and they stowed him away at the airport to keep him out of trouble. He sat in his patrol car and monitored for illegal parking and speeders. They would eat lunch in the patrol car. They worked every shift I worked. Life was super boring for months. We had a general who had a layover, and I snuck back into baggage claim with Jeff to see him sitting surrounded by guards. I saw a Navy woman so excited to see her boyfriend run super hard into the automatic door because it opens slightly slower than you'd expect. Boring minimum wage stuff. One day, around maybe 7:30 in the morning, the airport went on lockdown. Like red alert, all hands on deck lockdown. A piece of luggage from the first morning's flight was never claimed, and when it was investigated, it got tagged for explosive materials. Being the only 2 officers on site, Jeff and Brain have to assist the TSA. Tensions are high. They obviously don't say anything to the public, but I'm told over our staff radio to leave the building and go the parking lot. Like 30 minutes pass, and suddenly Brain comes running out of the building at full tilt, followed by Jeff screaming, look what we found!" And he's waving the biggest, blackest fist sex toy I've ever seen. Literally like 2 foot long. Brain's yelling back at him, "Keep that damn thing away from me! Keep it away from me!" Runs to his patrol call and starts rolling up the windows. Jeff tries to feed into the crack of the window. So when Brain eventually puts the car in gear, he leaves with a gigantic black sex toy stuck in his driver's window, flopping in the wind. One of my most precious memories. Story 52. I don't work for an airport, but I was visiting Vegas, and I took my laptop with me. The guy does the substances swab thing across the keyboard and yells out, "We've got a positive." I was horrified, but all the employees just started laughing. Then he handed it back and said their job is boring, so sometimes they'll duck with people. Story 53. Oh man. Back when I worked at the main office for an airline, we attended a feel-good meeting for employees, and I ended up sitting at a table of female flight attendants. As we described our jobs to one another, one of the stories that came out of that table was of a passenger who was flying home from basic training, job school, and had way too much to drink just before boarding. When it came time to deplane, he ended up tripping on his carry-on and falling face down partly between the seats and into the aisle. Instead of getting up, he stayed there, presenting the young flight attendants with a problem in getting the rest of the passengers off. While one of the attendants was trying to get the guy to get up, he was getting belligerent, the other called on the crew phone to the cockpit for help. About that time, a short, elderly gentleman near the back of the plane politely asked the flight attendant on the phone what had happened and received an explanation. The guy said, "I see," and walked down the aisle to where the other flight attendant was standing on the other side of the drunken soldier. The other flight attendant saw the old man stop to look down at the drunk and started to ask him to step back when he suddenly put his fists on his hips, and his voice rang throughout the plane with, "On your feet, soldier." Per the attendants, the drunk practically flew off the floor. Then the old guy leaned up into the drunk's ear and spoke quietly to him. The flight attendant telling the story said, "I don't know what the old man said to him, but the young guy looked _scared, _." When done, the old man told the drunk to pick up his gear and literally marched him off the plane into the hands of the police waiting on the loading ramp. They found out later the short, elderly gentleman was a retired Marine Corps senior drill instructor. God bless the Marines. Story 54. So many stories. Guy dropping his mom at airport for flight sees the elderly, soon to retire, police officer making his rounds, panics and jumps off the second floor of the drop-off in an attempt to escape, breaks both legs doing so. Funny guy came to checkpoint with cat and carrier. Wants to say to just x-ray the whole carrier, cat included? Itza refuses. Not safe for cat. Pax eventually agrees to take cat out. He puts these elbow-length gloves on and pulls this really pissed-off cat out of the carrier. Has the cat held out at arm's length, on hand, on scruff of neck, one hand on the back legs. Gets through screening process. Has Tissay stand crate on end so he can just lower devil cat into carrier. He lets go of the back legs and it promptly twists its back and hooks his arm past the gauntlet and hit his arm. Pax drops cat and it bolts for freedom into the bar area. Bar patrons scatter as it bounces off the windows. Police are pulling guns out as they chase after it. Pax is yelling, "Don't kill it! The sedative should kick in soon!" Sure enough, the sedative finally kicks in and it passes out in the bar. Emez responds wrap up Pax's arm and recommend tetanus shots and stitches at hospital. Pax declines, as he has a flight to catch. Pax had told airline he had a house cat. He really had some half-breed Egyptian wildcat. Airline declined to allow the clearly dangerous animal on the plane. Airline told passenger she could not fly with a snake. Passenger enters checkpoint with empty carry container, claims it was for crickets. Crickets are food for other things. Where's the critter that was in the cage? Pax states. She released it into one of the planters and will retrieve it when she returns. Officer talking to her notices that her tight shirt now shows a moving third nipple. Passenger forced to give snake and cage to non-flying family. Story 55. I'm in management for a large airline here in the States. While wrapping flights up for the night, we had a flight going to a small regional airport the next state over. While waiting for these super tight connecting passengers, the gate had to close the door. Shortly after the door closed, passengers came running up as the ground crew were about to push the plane out. I was doing my rounds around gates to make sure everything was wrapped up properly, and saw these people getting upset at the gate agent, so I decided to go upstairs in case something happened. At that time, the gate agent's supervisor was there to take over. He basically told the passengers that since they were there for 2 hours, the tight connection passengers never showed up. They couldn't do anything for them since it was their mistake, and not an error or situation controllable by the airline. After a while of the male screaming and yelling, the supervisor offered many things to help. Hotel, car rental discount, food vouchers, etc. He kept turning them down. I then hear him yell, "This is bullcrap. You better get us a damn private plane and fly us." At that point, the supervisor basically laughed and told the gentleman there was nothing else he could do if he didn't want to take the other offers that were on the table. He started to walk away and the passenger has the nerve to take his phone out and record the supervisor walking away. They refused to do anything for me after I missed my flight. The supervisor told me to go duck myself and walked away. Blah blah. It was ridiculous. Story 56. So this happened at an airport my buddy used to fly out of. There are 2 pretty big flight schools there, so there are a whole bunch of small one-engine planes and small training helicopters out on the ramp all the time. One day, one of the helicopter instructors at one of the schools is taking his girlfriend on her first helicopter ride. The instructor turns on the helicopter and is going through all his pre-flight checks, and a dude dressed in a black hoodie, it's like 85 degrees out, and sunglasses, hops the fence and walks up to the helicopter. He then pulls a gun on the instructor and his girlfriend and tells them to get out. They do, but on his way out, the instructor slyly cuts off the fuel, shutting off the engine on his way out without the gunman noticing. So the gunman hops in right when the engine is stopping and attempts to restart the helicopter. Luckily, there are 3 other instructors inside the school that have their concealed carry permits and happen to be packing that day. After the helicopter instructor and his girlfriend come in yelling about what just happened, these guys run out and surround the helicopter that this guy somehow figured out how to restart. I can't remember exactly what my friend said happened next, but the cops came, the guy got scared and couldn't take off, ends up running across the street and gets caught behind a hotel by the police. Nobody knows what his intentions were. His family and friends couldn't help with supplying a motive, and he'd never been in a helicopter a day in his life. So how he was able to start one and how he planned to fly it remains to be answered. Story 57. A 767 from our neighbors here on the ramp took a turn too sharp on the taxiway in winter and got stuck in the snow, mud. It was stuck there for 36 hours, while they brought in their ACMX guys from their main hub to try and get it out. Meanwhile, 80,000 pounds of Amazon orders and other stuff important enough to burn jet fuel to move just had to sit. I can't imagine what it cost them to recover it all in the plane. Story 58. I don't work in an airport, but when I was traveling home, there was a beagle sniffing everyone as they walked by to make sure they didn't have anything illegal. Then that beagle heard someone's dog barking that just came off the plane. That was when that beagle clocked out and was all in for playtime. The police couldn't get the beagle to calm down because he just wanted to play. Story 59. Got to see an F-16 come in for a landing and a bird get sucked into the intake. Jet exploded and pilot ejected in time. It was pretty cool that I got to go pick up all the pieces of it too. Most landed in this farmer's land and he couldn't grow any more crops, so now he is super rich from the government. Story 60. Worked airport maintenance at a relatively small airport, only doing 4 or so commercial flights a day, but was also home to a flight school that had pilots constantly using the runways. Anyway, there was some construction workers relaying an apron airside, and so they needed to be escorted and essentially watched. While watching these guys for like 6 hours, I looked up and saw literally hundreds of seagulls. They all land on the runway, forcing us to essentially shut it down. We tried everything to scare them away, driving a truck through them and blaring sirens to scare them, but they just fly straight in the air and land back where they were. This is dangerous for a plane to land in, especially smaller planes. So we grabbed our shotguns and made a game of it. So that was a weird day. Story 61. For a summer during college, I had a job as a ramp agent, aka baggage handler, at a regional airport. As a temp employee, the pay was crap, but overall I really enjoyed the job. I usually worked the afternoon night shift, which was pretty relaxed after the first couple of hours. We would get flights arriving until about midnight, although O'Hare would regularly send us significantly delayed flights. So sometimes we'd be there until 2 or 3 in the morning. One night it was rounding on 2 a.m. and pretty much the entire airport had gone home except for me and the other agent. We were stuck waiting for the last O'Hare plane to show up. It was about 15 minutes out, so we head outside to get ready. As we make our way to the scheduled gate, we walk around a sky bridge and there's a guy on the tarmac with a rifle about a gate and a half away from us. He seemed to see us and didn't really react to our presence, but he was walking in our direction. As an airport employee, even just a lowly temp worker, you're reminded pretty thoroughly to always keep an eye out for people not wearing badges in restricted areas. This is what I'm focusing on as Sam mutters, "Oh, crap," and beelines for cover. I just stand there like a git thinking, I didn't expect this to be how I'd die. Meanwhile, Rifle Guy is pretty much right next to us now, and he finally realizes that he's got us crafting ourselves. So he gets his badge out of his pocket. Apparently on some nights after the airport shuts down, there are employees who go out on the tarmac with air rifles to get rid of the pigeons. They really ought to warn everybody else about that. Story 62. At Frankfurt Airport sometime last year, there was a lady who tested positive for explosives. She somehow got away from the airport security. Airport gets shut down and they start evacuating the terminals. German security officers start yelling for everyone to move towards the train. Someone yells, "Okay, but no tricks this time." Story 63. Was working at an airport one summer. Small airport that mostly flew small commercial and private. Also home to an aviation, defense company, and FedEx. Anyways, one day a small plane flew in and dropped off a group of business execs at the aviation defense company. They met up with some people from the company and were walked into the hangar. Now I was standing about 500 feet away, but did not have an angle to see inside, but did notice the nose of the aircraft they were looking at. The next day I get to work around 7 a.m., and I see probably about 30 people outside that hangar all looking up into the sky. Above us was a tiny airplane flying in circles overhead. At least I thought it was tiny. A few minutes later, it was coming into land, and I got a better look at it. It pulled back into the area outside the hangar, and I thought, there's no way more than one person can fit into that thing. Sure enough, one man jumped out, and another jumped in and took off. The plane didn't do anything special in the air, just flew in circles. A couple days later, I was talking to another airport employee, and it turns out it was a prototype for NASA, and the execs from earlier were NASA execs coming to see their prototype fly. Story 64. I used to work at a cute little bar cafe, crepe kiosk in a small airport in Vermont. I was often alone while working there, and I had all sorts of people trying to extort money from me because of whatever travel tragedy had supposedly occurred. One of my first nights closing up alone, this young-looking woman came up to the kiosk, bawling her eyes out about how she had her purse stolen and needed $60 for a bus ticket back home to Boston. I was so close to almost giving her some cash, but I decided against it and gave her a cup of coffee and some cinnamon rolls and said good luck. The next day I went shopping and saw her at Plato's Closet. I just laughed and kept walking. Nothing too crazy, just a good lesson learned. Story 65. No longer work at the airport, but I did when I was in college. So one of their tasks of the ramp crew is the empty AA plane's lavatory when it's full. The airplane in question was, I think, a 747 or something like that. Maybe an Airbus, but think big jumbo jet. To get rid of the poop and piss, you need to go up in a lavatory truck with a cherry picker bucket. One guy drives. One guy goes in the bucket and gets lifted to the poop valves. The guy in the bucket hooks up a hose and opens the valve to drain. You're supposed to wear a face shield when you're up in the bucket, and the guy driving is supposed to watch you. Well, this day, neither happened. For whatever reason, the hose failed to stay connected to the port. When the valve was opened, the hose popped off, and excrement rained down on the dude up in the bucket. Guy on the ground was slow to react. Guy on the bucket is essentially stuck, as the contents from one set of lavs rained on him for a good 15 seconds before the dude on the ground moved the truck out of the crap storm. They sat him on the tarmac while a hazmat crew hosed him down. He was then sent to get tests for pretty much everything. Didn't work for the same airline company, so I don't know what happened to him other than that he had quite a crafty day. Story 66. Strangest, funniest. I fall asleep on a flight from East Coast to West Coast. I woke up and felt nauseous, so I popped up and headed for the bathroom. Halfway there, I woke up on my hands, knees, and face. I heard someone ask, "Sir, are you okay?" With my face on the floor, I replied, "Fine. You?" I was helped to my feet and got checked by a nurse that just happened to be on the flight. I also got a free water and cookie. Scariest, funniest. I was on a plane that dropped so far that we felt 0 G for a couple seconds. The flight attendant grabbed a nearby passenger, me, and the cart hit the ceiling. A second later, the cart crashed to the floor. The masks dropped, lights flashed, and people were screaming. For some reason, I felt the need to put my hands over my head, like on a roller coaster, and said, "Woo!" The lady next to me literally hit me as she didn't find the moment as funny as I did. Story 67. Parents both worked as flight service specialists, air traffic control, but for smaller airports, growing up. Some of the things they saw: a pair of stunt planes colliding with each other at the bottom of their loop, single-engine aircraft flipping head over heels and landing on its roof, flybys of CF-18S water bombers, initial attack aircraft going on their missions. Americans on their way to Alaska as a child when I'd visit them at work. Sometimes I'd be able to sit at an empty station and play around. Unplugged mics, buttons didn't do anything. And the ones that didn't do anything dangerous. I was talking to Mike Lima Papa once, and literally after I was done addressing the aircraft, they responded. Pure coincidence. But my dad had a good chuckle at the look of shock, amazement on my face. Story 68. A few weeks ago, I was walking out at the end of my shift. Passing through baggage claim, it's about 10:30 p.m. There are about 100 people in the area I was in. I hear someone yell, "He's got my gun!" Everyone froze for 2 seconds. Finally, someone started to run, and we all followed suit. Being amidst a large crowd of people scrambling away from a potential shooter is the most terrifying thing I've been a part of. The reported details of what happened are murky. The official story was that a cop was arresting a guy. Guy reaches for cop's gun. Guy never successfully secures cop's gun. No danger. If that's the case, why was he yelling, "He's got my gun," repeatedly? Story 69. My mom worked as a TSA agent for years. Most days were pretty calm, and people are usually polite and understanding. The worst treatment she gets on a day-to-day occurrence, the occasional scoff and snobby attitude. One day, though, people were in a really bad mood, and she couldn't figure out why until this old lady came through. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I think someone's dog might have relieved itself nearby." My mom said it would be taken care of soon enough and checked the lady's bag. Service animals are everywhere, and some of the emotional support ones can be less trained than their handicapped counterparts. It isn't till like a few minutes later that the smell finally hits her. It wasn't dog poop. Apparently this happens every so often. Someone waiting in line just can't hold it, but doesn't want to lose their spot, so they drop trousers and go. This person somehow managed to get away with it without anybody seeing. Story 70. Kadena Ab, Okinawa, Japan is an airport, I guess, but July 1999, base hosts a 2-day event called America Fest when they set up vendors on the taxiway and let locals come on and see what it's like. lots of food vendors, family activities, and lots of booze. In the morning of day 2, my squadron is sending aircraft to go to eat. About 10 of 15s are sitting at the end of the runway waiting for clearance. A line of grass, maybe 20 feet wide, separates the runways and taxiways, and while jets are running, a drunk, shirtless airman, marine, sailor sits up, looks around and starts running across the tarmac until security forces picked him up. He still had a plastic margarita flute hanging around his neck. Story 71. I was a project manager for a renovation project at my city's airport. We were building new ticketing kiosks, offices for the airlines. So eventually we had to move all the stuff from the old offices to the new ones. As some of the guys are moving stuff, a grenade roll onto the floor. I get a call and meet up with the superintendent to figure out what to do. Most likely, the entire airport is about to get shut down for a bomb sweep. The superintendent, an ex-Marine, approaches the grenade to get a look at it, picks it up and says, "It's a fake. It was a prop used to test ESA's searches. We were seconds away from having to ruin a ton of people's days if it weren't for the bit of luck that the superintendent had knowledge of explosives." Story 72. Don't have any personal stories, but my uncle has a big one. He has always worked with helicopters and currently works as a helipilot examiner, which is pretty specialized work as you can imagine. He also helps with the calibration, testing of simulators. Ironically, this means he spends most of his working week sitting on planes, traveling to simulators around the world. One of these flights, something bothered him about the way the plane was flown. Can't remember what? Maybe an excessively rough landing? Anyhow, the flight had a stopover, and he decided to get off early. He read on the paper the next day that a plane had crashed on the same route. He dug around, and sure enough, it was his plane. There were no survivors. Story 73. Not an airport employee, but had a funny experience boarding a plane at MLA. We were traveling fast track with EasyJet, so got to go through the gate first. A man traveling regular arrived and realized he couldn't board. He got angry and said smugly, "It doesn't matter if they go through first. All they will do is wait in the bus until we get on." Go down the stairs and get on the bus and wait. Eventually, the smug guy comes down the stairs with a big smug grin on his face in front of the regular customers. At this moment, the doors on the bus closed, stopping him from boarding, and his smile disappeared. Story 74. I used to work in a tiny little store in the airport that sold snacks, magazines, souvenirs. I only lasted a week there, and it was because this woman who obviously thought she was a queen of the Middle East. She bought one of everything in the store, which rang up to thousands, and then proceeded to return everything. She also gitted about how long it was taking and blamed us for missing her flight. I've worked in other retail stores, but I've never had anyone buy one of each item and then return it that same day. It was strange. Deck what that lady was thinking, but she probably had 4 kids. In fact, she kept blabbering about them while she piled everything on my counter. Story 75. I worked cargo security for a bit in Miami. I was working on the X-ray machine. You usually can't tell what the duck was coming through the machines, but this one time I called my supervisor over, laughing my ass off. He makes it over and starts laughing even harder. Eventually, most of the other guards, maintenance staff, and loaders are at the machine laughing as well. The shipment was over 1 ton of giant sex toy that looked like they were intended for elephants going to Venezuela. And I mean, damn, huge sex toy. Story 76. Former employee of major airport. Let's just say that when the drunks crash the fence and end up driving around the taxiways, it's usually at night. Also, homeless people are ninjas and breach security occasionally, but normally get found within an hour. Sometimes it takes a day. Story 77. Oh, I have so many, but this is my favorite. A girl tried to take her full-grown Great Dane as an emotional support animal. Well, it's our policy that any animal, including service animals, can only be on board if they fit within the passenger's designated leg space. If it encroaches on another passenger's already limited personal space, it's not allowed to go. She threw a huge fit and stormed off, even though we were trying to rebook her on a flight with more open seats. If the seat next to her was open, the dog could use that space. As she was walking away, her dog took a huge crap on the airport floor, and he was walking, craping all over the place. An airport police officer saw this happen and approached her. He asked her nicely to clean it up. She looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Damn no," then stormed off. The airport is a crazy place. I have a story like this for almost every day I've worked. Story 78. I used to work for Essay. I saw a lot of sex toys. I also caught a gun. Cop left it in his bag. He was so cocky that he didn't leave anything in his bag and was annoyed until we pulled it out. One old man had this huge rubber sex toy. He said it was his wife's, but he was traveling alone. Another guy, a Japanese businessman, I checked his bag and he had this flashlight-type toy in a bag. I closed it up, didn't even touch it, and told him to have a good day. I would also see urns and ashes of people in once. I wasn't aware that it was someone's urn filled with ashes. We're not supposed to let it roll off into the rollers out of respect and courtesy. We pull it out and hand it to the passenger. But my TSO didn't inform me that she was passing the urn, so I just let it go and I felt bad. Story 79. My mom worked Southwest for quite a while, especially during the 11th of September. She was in Islip, Long Island, and she had gotten the call about locking down the airport and whatnot. So she's going crazy mode doing what she has to. Considering the attack was maybe 4-hour drive away and no one knowing anything, she understandable freaked out, but calm and collected. In comes Get McGee. Why are we delayed? This is ridiculous. Sir, No, this is ridiculous. I want on my flight. Sir, we are under damn attack. 2 planes just flew into the World Trade Center. Would you like to be next? Look at the TV to your left. She said she has never been like that with a customer, but she was so stressed and this dude wasn't helping. Story 80. The pilot for one of our smaller planes requested de-ice. He's a very picky guy when it comes to spraying his plane, so he got out to inspect when he thought the crew was done. The de-ice truck was on the other side of the plane and the crew didn't see him get out. They weren't done. He got soaked by hot orange glycol. Fortunately, it was indirect spray coming off the plane instead of directly from the nozzle at high pressure. The flight was delayed while he ran inside to change, swearing the whole way. Story 81. My mother was on her way to work at YZ in pre-board security. She called me to say she just saw a massive explosion. As I made my way to the fire department, my pager went off, alerting us to a 747 cargo plane crashing just past the runway. It was easily in my top 3 craziest scenes to be on. Story 82. Obligatory, I don't work at an airport, but my friend's dad does in security. He told me about a heavily pregnant lady who came through wearing a bright pink hoodie. At the airport he works at, they have the new body scanners that take an X-ray-like image as you go through. Lady goes through, and my friend's dad gets waved over by his colleague checking the screen. She points at the lady and says, "Does that look like a baby to you?" Woman had a full cooked chicken up her hoodie. When questioned on it, she started eating it as fast as possible, whilst covered in pink fluff.